from this point, basically. So perhaps I'll introduce myself. So I'm John May. I'm the head of partnerships, which is a verbose title for BDM. I manage relationships between Data Never Dies and our myriads of different mortgage partners. I think that was okay, wasn't it? Maybe I'll hand over to you.
I'm Nikki Poulton, and I'm the Marketing Director here at D&D as well. And John and I had actually just jumped on this call because he had some feedback from the clients and some calls he'd made today. And we just thought we would hit record on this because actually there was a lot of really good information out here that we thought would be fantastic to share with our audience. So
Indeed.
We were actually talking about high value landlords. Now, my assumption, if you say a high value landlord, is that that's somebody who's got a team set up, they're locked in with the brokers that they're using, they're never going to change. But the reason I hit record is because you said that I'm wrong.
Yeah, indeed. And when I say you're wrong, I'm not saying that that's not a really fair assumption. And that's an assumption that many of my broker partners have. But upon reflection, that's not necessarily the case. I think as we've seen the advent of costs ever increasing for landlords, whether that be insurance or whether that be mortgaging or maintenance to the property, whatever it happens to be, lots of landlords are now shopping around, right? Those high value landlords specifically. And when I say shopping around, it's not always majoring on price. Oftentimes it's majoring on two things, which is advice. So when that advice is given, it's not just your mortgage is in 6 months' time, let's have a conversation about making sure you're remortgaged, but it's a consistent overview of the market, a consistent perspective from the brokers, other clients on what they're doing, and a small amount of price as well. That always has to come into the equation. But realistically, those high value landlords are available. They're not always tied up, and they are desperate, Nikki, for good advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people are these days, but you just assume that if someone is high value, that they're not, that they're going to have all this locked in. But actually, let's take a step back and can you explain to me and describe how are we defining a high value landlord?
Yeah, and I had a really interesting conversation about exactly that. Not only a couple of days ago in regards to what is a high value landlord, because typically you would view that based upon loan value, right? You take it at face value. If it's a big loan value, then it's going to be a high value landlord. That's not always the case, right? A high value landlord could be an individual with multiple properties, the portfolio size being of a requisite value that makes sense to be a high value landlord. It could well be their network is of considerable value to that broker. And interestingly, what I tend to find, Nikki, when I'm speaking to our broker partners, as we do all day, every day, is that these high value landlords typically require less work for higher output, or sorry, higher outcome for a broker. So oftentimes it makes sense to invest time in seeking out these landlords, whether it be, yes, you take it on face value, and a high value landlord is that with a big loan value or a large portfolio size or a number of investments or seeking to become a landlord. I think sort of one of those three things, as long as it's going to come down to pounds and pence, right? But as long as that value is there, then there's a huge amount of value for brokers from finding those individuals.
So there is an element with high value where actually that value is about long-term investment. So whether that that person's going to recommend you to 10 of their network, which is obviously more money, or whether that's somebody who's actively building their portfolio. So it's somebody with long-term as well as high monetary value.
Indeed, and I think that the more experienced of our broker partners, and we're sort of seeing this shift away from what is that first mortgage value, what is the prop fee, what is the outcome for me in 3 months' time after doing this mortgage, and it's more around customer lifetime value. And the more, how do I phrase this? The more experienced or the more long-sighted brokers that we work with and that I speak to will sometimes forego the initial proc fee for the long-term value of that client. And again, right, we know that high-value landlords are out there. We know that they're shopping around based upon service and based around price. But when you find that landlord, when you build that relationship, when you do multiple mortgages for that landlord, the likelihood is that you're going to retain that customer for a really long time. And based upon, if you major on service, landlords are incredibly sticky and oftentimes creatures of habit as well, right?
From my point of view, my logic was, as you've said, they're creatures of habit. They've got a relationship they've potentially
Indeed.
built up for months or even years. So, twofold question: why would they be looking to leave that person they've worked with so much? And if you're the broker looking to scoop them up, how do you keep them happy for years?
Indeed. So on your first point, there's a slow but steady shift in the marketplace away from transactional brokering to transformational brokering over a longer period of time. Now, where those high value landlords haven't made that shift with their broker currently, there's a clear opportunity to really major on service to ensure that you're scooping up those individuals. And on your latter point, how do you find them? It's challenging, right? It is challenging. We acknowledge that these individuals aren't always the most available, should we say? So again, referrals always, we're going to put our hands up, referrals are always the best way of finding new business. And yet, Nikki, on your second point of how to keep them happy, that's the $1 million question, right? How do we all retain business? That's the challenging part of what all of us do. But again, it's the majoring on service aspect. I think majoring on price, race to the bottom, is often very finicky, although there will always be an element of cost consideration, especially with this horrible cost of living crisis that we're all currently enduring. But in order to keep them happy long term, it's all about relationship. It's all about the transformational relationships and the difference you make to that individual over the long term. This is no longer the world of placing a call 6 months before a mortgage expires and saying, this is the best product for you. It is about newslettering, it's about constant outreach, it's around making sure that individual knows that you're there not just to make the money, you're there to actually make a difference to their business. And again, oftentimes these portfolio landlords, they do look at this as a business. Oftentimes these landlords perhaps don't have another role, they are a full-time landlord, and as such they expect the services they consume, whether it be insurance brokering, mortgage brokering, maintenance, whatever it is, you need to become their team. You need to become a trusted advisor. And that is really when you start to see that, yeah, you can find these guys, sure, but you need to keep them as well. And that's when you retain that business.